So, I mean, then zeroing in more on Aristotle, um, particularly, you've written a lot about uh, his theory of partisanship, and the way that people kind of go into ideological camps. Um, can you just talk a little bit more about how he defines that concept in his work, particularly politics and Nicomachean ethics?
Right. So one quick thing is partisanship is the word that I use to try to capture what I think Aristotle is talking about. So there's no Greek word that's the obvious stand-in for partisanship. But here's what you find in Aristotle, and then maybe you can tell me whether you think this sounds like partisanship or not. I think it does. um, but Aristotle thinks that all political communities um, show a certain kind of cleavage. All political societies are broken up into different kinds of groups. And the two groups that show up most frequently are, they go by different names, but we'll just call them for the sake of this conversation. There's on the one hand the rich, who are few in number, and on the other hand there are the poor, who are many in number. And Aristotle thinks that all political societies tend to feature these two groups. Now, what's particularly interesting is Aristotle thinks that these two groups won't just be distinguished in terms of the social traits they have, namely the amount of wealth they have, or the amount of, I guess I should say, social resources they have, and then just literally how many they are in number. But he thinks that both of those groups tend to adopt a very distinctive kind of psychology. And the psychology he attributes to those two groups is one where they both have a very set theory of conception of justice. They both have different conceptions of what it means to be flourishing as a human being. They both have very different emotions from one another. And they both believe that only people like them have the best view on the way political decision making should take place. So they really do have their whole psychological approach to politics is profoundly different from one another. And so that's why I believe that that's why Aristotle consistently describes these two groups as being just like oil and water. They do not mix. They are always suspicious of one another, and they're always on the verge of getting into some kind of brawl or some kind of fight, because their worldviews are very different, and they believe that the other group is completely wrong in their approach. So Aristotle thinks that most political societies will always feature those two groups, who are really just sticking up for their part of the society rather than for the whole of society. And psychologically, they're locked into doing so. So that's why I think partisanship is an effective way of describing or summarizing Aristotle's theory.
When you say that it separates into rich and poor and their psychological states are entirely different, that reminds me a lot of Marx. So is this a theory that's similar to Marx's theory, or does Aristotle's vision differentiate itself from Marx in some kind of way?
Yeah, there are similarities. There clearly are some similarities in that Aristotle does believe that if you go into a city and just want to quickly describe, where's the main site of tension in this society, he does think that more often than not, that tension is going to be between the richer folks and the poorer folks. Now, so there is a similarity. And I think different Marxists have often remarked on this and found a lot of resources in Aristotle. Now, but the difference, however, is that Aristotle never wants to reduce the conflict to partisan conflict to just differences in wealth. And in fact, it's the differences in the psychologies of these two groups that ends up being the very problematic part. Because Aristotle says you can have people who are poor from the poor who end up making a lot of money, but they're still looking out at the world in a way where they're thinking like a poor person. So, maybe even wealth isn't the key metric that's going on. It's rather the psychology of that the people have in terms of their theory of justice, their theory of happiness, and then the different emotions that they have. So, for Aristotle, the poor, and I'm putting those in quotation marks because they might actually have quite a bit of money. For Aristotle, they believe that happiness is being able to do whatever you want. Justice is having everyone end up being the same or given equal amounts of social goods. And finally, Aristotle thinks that they tend to suffer from envy of anyone who raises above the crowd in some way. And vice versa for the rich, the people who have lots of social resources, they tend to suffer from arrogance. They tend to think that happiness is just acquiring lots of money. And they think that the justice demands that the people who are successful in life, in terms of their wealth, are given the most social control as well. So it's a story that resembles Marx maybe in one way, but it's the psychological picture involves things that go way beyond just wealth. It's really a clash in conceptions of justice, a clash in conceptions of happiness, and a clash in people's emotional repertoire as well.
And are we meant to take these distinctions literally, or is he setting up a theoretical basis for how societies generally organize themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what he's trying to do is he thinks that these are sort of paradigmatic ways of thinking about the main social blocks you'll find in society. Any given society might have people who aren't quite like that cartoonish type. And he himself makes more fine-grained distinctions among those people who are poorer in social resources versus people who are richer in resources. So, for example, among the people who are poorer in social resources, he includes people like successful craftsmen, farmers, people like that, as well as people who barely have enough money just to scrape by day and who are wage laborers. So there's differences among people who are poorer in social resources, even though all of them might be fit under this sort of stereotype that he's trying to theorize. And on the other side, among the rich, he thinks that there can be lots of smaller landowners and people who have estates who are quite a bit different from people of dynastic wealth, who are from these very old established families who have so much wealth that they, aren't even that attached to the city anymore because their wealth expands well beyond the political boundaries of the city. So again, they're within this stereotype of people who are rich in social resources. Even there's lots of differences on the ground in any given city. So, I think he takes himself as offering these sort of stereotypes that should offer you a way of starting your analysis when you go into a city. But then he also thinks that you should be ready to notice differences and subtle variations from one place to another.